The ability to understand Japanese isolationist policies is an essential part of understanding how Japan first related to the West on the world stage, and, to an extent, how it relates to the Western world today. Japan practiced isolationism in the Edo period, which is also known as the Tokugawa period. This time period lasted from the early 1600s through the mid-1800s. The central mandate dealing with the Japanese isolation was the Sikaku Edict. This edict— Whoa, hold up. This is supposed to be an educational presentation. If you're going to do something, do it right and get your facts straight. Japan didn't isolate itself. It was more of a seclusion. It's often referred to in Western cultures as isolationism because Japan limited trade with the West. They didn't just limit trade, they banned foreigners from entering the country on penalty of death. The shogunate denied its people the opportunity to become a more civilized, advanced society and missed out on a huge period of cultural growth. There were a number of reasons Japan wanted to keep Western civilizations out of their country. Religion, politics, and economics are three of the main factors, although there were others as well. Spain and Portugal were conquering the New World at the time, and they were getting very close to Japan. The Spanish conquest of the Philippines was viewed as a very real danger by the rulers of Japan, and, like any ruler of any country, they didn't want their power taken away. The Dutch, who wanted to be able to trade with Japan, aggravated this concern by claiming that Spain and Portugal were systematically converting the population to Catholicism. The spread of a new religion doesn't mean you have to ban the faith and its missionaries from the country. Furthermore, Japan didn't just ban Catholicism, they sought out Catholics and forced them to renounce their faith. Hundreds of people were killed for their faith. Many more had their homes taken from them and died as a result of their poverty. Such barbaric actions are testaments to the argument that they needed to be saved by the guidance of the Catholic Church. A civilized society would recognize that a relatively rapid spread of Catholicism was a sign that the people wanted the religion. The Japanese government didn't have the right to deny them their salvation, nor did it have the right to brutally persecute followers of the faith. You mean like the way many European nations persecuted Muslims, or how the Catholic Church sanctioned the massacres known as the Crusades? Religious threats to power were taken very seriously in Japan. Before the Tokugawa shogunate unified Japan under one power, there was a period of almost constant military conflict, often called the Warring States period. During this time, there were many challenges to power by armed Buddhist monks. The Tokugawa shogunate was wary of a similar conflict from the Catholic converts in the population. Oda Nobunaga, a feudal lord from the end of the Warring States period, had encouraged the spread and conversion to Catholicism to compete with his Buddhist rivals. It is likely that, without that support, the spread of Catholicism would have been much slower. Why would the actions of Buddhist monks in an earlier time cause the shogunate to be so concerned about Catholics? They are two very different religions from very different places. It's paranoid to apply the actions of one to the motives of the other. This is further support for the guidance of a European nation that is capable of a higher degree of reason. History cannot exist without the context of more history, and there's always more than one motivation. The actions of the Buddhist monks were part of a civil war in Japan that lasted over 100 years. Japan was only recently unified in the presence of a new religion where its followers were ultimately loyal to the laws and orders of a leader half a world away were concerning. This was compounded upon by the realizations that the Catholic Church was spreading relatively quickly throughout Japan, and the possibility of the Spanish and Portuguese encouraging a rebellion that might result in an outcome for Japan similar to that of the Philippines. The spread of religion is often used to gain a presence in a foreign land. After gaining some sway with a decent size of the population, a European country like Spain could use their religious influence to create a division in the society and generate a supposed need for sending military support to whichever side of the conflict they choose to support. Once you have the skilled soldiers in a country, it's harder to get them out. Japan recognized that some European countries, like Spain, were using tactics to justify their conquest of other lands, like the Philippines, and the shogunate wasn't being paranoid, they were just paying attention. If the Japanese were at war with each other for over 100 years, they were obviously a more primitive civilization that could use the guidance of a more developed nation. Much of feudal Europe featured nobles fighting with each other the same way that warlords fought with each other in the Warring State periods of Japanese history. The Tokugawa shogunate unified Japan. They were trying to keep Japan unified and help it grow and develop economically, culturally, and politically. It's a bit unreasonable that the fear of being taken over via the use of another religion, however valid or not, would cause a nation to ban the presence of any foreigners at all. Instead of banning the foreign people, why not just ban the religion like so many other countries? Well, Japan did ban Catholicism. However, religion was only part of the issue. Many of the ships that were visiting Japanese ports were armed merchant vessels or militaristic ships. All of that foreign military power right at Japan's door was understandably concerning. And Japan's list of potential military threats was not limited to foreigners. During the conflicts of the Warring States period, some of the warlords would get supplies and weapons through trade at ports. Limiting the trade so strictly allowed the Tokugawa shogunate to keep a better eye on what was moving in and out of the country, as well as preventing their potential rivals from gaining enough power to be an issue. If the Tokugawa shogunate wasn't strong enough to keep Japan unified on its own, then it shouldn't have been in charge. A nation with a stronger military force, like the European nations, would do a much better job of enforcing unification, and they could do it without shutting down Japan's access to a global trade network and hurting their economy. The Tokugawa shogunate was strong enough to keep Japan unified. They did it in their own way, a way that kept them from having to worry about war with European nations hungry for conquest. If Europeans had been put in charge of Japan's economy, it would not have thrived. There would have been an unequal balance of trade, like in many of the other nations that were occupied or controlled by Europe. Japan didn't shut down their international trade, they just limited their direct trade with most of Europe. They traded with the Ainu people, one of the native peoples of Japan, through northern parts of the country, and traded with Korea at the ports on the island of Tsushima. Japan could access the international market by trading with the Dutch through Nagasaki, or the Chinese through Nagasaki and the Ryukyu Kingdom. Such strict regulations hurt the Japanese economy, though. There were markups when trading indirectly, and goods would have been cheaper if Japan had just opened its borders to trading with all of Europe. The Japanese economy actually thrived during the Edo period. There were significant advances in domestic trading and in the international trade that Japan did engage in. The shogunate only allowed certain types of ships into their ports, so they didn't have to worry about a huge military presence at every port, getting restless waiting for the possibility of heavily armed ships or weaponized merchant vessels to attack them. Each merchant also had to register with Japan and get a special license to be able to trade. The money collected from registrations, along with the taxes on goods, were part of what allowed the Tokugawa shogunate to have the revenue necessary to remain in power, a problem that contributed to the constant change of power during the Warring States period. Still, the lack of access to the scientific advancements of European nations had to set the Japanese back. That's not something they could get with just taxes. No, but it is something they could get through their relationships with the Dutch and the Chinese, who also traded with European nations. Because Japan was now unified and not at war with itself, it was able to make a considerable number of advancements on their own. The agricultural development of the time period allowed for more people to explore other options for making their livelihoods, and a significant increase in urbanization of Japan. Urban centers, such as Osaka and Kyoto, became trading centers and significant places for the production of handmade goods. During the Edo period, Japan developed an infrastructure of roads that helped facilitate the exchange of goods, ideas, and people throughout the country. The upper classes of society were also fairly well educated and developed advanced financial and marketing systems. So Japan just became a huge center for resources and goods, which is the same it would have been even if a European country had ended up in control of it. There's not a real difference. While Japan may have received some industrial advancement if it had been in control of a European country, it would not have had the same results for Japan. First of all, many European nations did not work on developing their colonies for their own sakes. There was also often an unfavorable balance of trade for the colony as well, so even if Japan had been developed, their economy would not have seen the same benefits. Many European colonies also ended up sending a lot more of their resources out of the country, with little to no concern for what it would mean for the colony. Because of the urbanization Japan experienced during the Edo time period, there was a drastic increase in the need for lumber. The Japanese realized this was a limited resource and developed advanced forest management policy. By the 1700s, they had detailed knowledge of silviculture and plantation forestry, something that Europe wouldn't have for many more centuries. Even if Japan's economy was slightly better, they still missed out on a number of scientific advancements. Furthermore, exposure to the European ideas could have helped them develop a more sophisticated culture. Japan actually experienced a very progressive advancement of technology, social and political reforms, developments of the arts and their own cultures, and the growth of many schools of thought. They could access information about European advancements through their connections with the Dutch and the Chinese. Since they weren't fighting in wars, members of the samurai class experienced a renewed interest in Japanese history and in cultivating thought. This resulted in the development of Bushido, a way of life that valued honor, loyalty, honesty, living simply, and being diligent. The common people of Japan also developed a way of life, Chonido, that aspired to these traits, but also blended beliefs of many of the different religious and philosophical thoughts that made up Japanese culture. Chonido also emphasized quality workmanship, especially in the arts, and encouraged the pursuit of knowledge. Math, science, engineering, and medicine were all fields that were studied and experienced a number of significant advancements during the Edo period. The arts also flourished during this period. Japan saw many great poets and playwrights and the development of kabuki and bunraku theaters. There were also a number of notable musicians and artists. So you're arguing Japan's isolationism was a good thing? Not quite. I'm saying that their seclusion from Europe wasn't a bad thing.